My name is Rajner LaBounty. I'm the daughter of PFC George J. Rajner, D Company 505th, 82nd Airborne. This is my father at age 25 in 1942 when he enlisted. This is the only formal picture we have of him. More than 400,000 servicemen gave their lives in World War II, leaving 800,000 children fatherless. I'm one of those children, and I would like to share our father's story and how his death has impacted my life and my siblings. George was born on April 12, 1917, to Peter and Mary Kislin Rajner in Toledo, Ohio. He was the seventh of their 10 children and the fourth to survive childhood diseases. That claimed 3 of his siblings. Both parents were immigrants from Europe, and George and his 5 brothers grew up in the East Toledo ethnic neighborhood, made up mostly of Hungarians and Slovaks. This is a picture of my dad. He's the boy standing. He's 5 years old. He has 2 brothers sitting on the horse, Albert and Stephen passed away the following year. He attended Holy Rosary Catholic School and graduated in 1931. 8 years of formal education. Because of the Great Depression, he did not go on to school, but worked many menial jobs. His father died a year later in 1932. All the boys were expected to help contribute to the family. In 1936, at the age of 19, our mother and father married. This is my mom and dad's wedding picture. They had a very small wedding at church, nothing formal in those times. Depression. They both lived in the same neighborhood and knew each other from a young age. They soon had 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys. I am the oldest. Life was good. George found work with a large construction firm, and for the first time in his life, there was enough money to support a family. Then the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, bringing the USA into World War II. After a few months, George realized he was destined to be drafted and decided to enlist. I was 6 years old in 1942 when our father enlisted in the Army and volunteered for paratrooper training. This is my dad and mom. This is when he enlisted. This is when he was 25 years old in our backyard, which my mother and dad were just renting a house at the time, and he was working construction. Our dad did not tell our mother, and when he did return home one night, she became worried. Soon a neighbor came knocking and said there was a phone call from her at their house, as we had no phone. It was our dad telling Mom he joined the Army. At first, she didn't believe him, and she said, "You need to get home." Well, a few days later, a package came with his clothes, so now she was convinced. She then took me with her to the local draft board to try to get him released on a hardship case. The gentleman she was seeing told her it would be very difficult to do that, and she would probably not be very happy, and he would probably not be very happy with her. So we left and went home. Our dad was accepted into paratrooper training and was sent to Camp Toccoa, Georgia, and assigned to 506 E Company, now known as Band of Brothers. He is an original member of this company and served 9 months, July 1942 till April 1943. This shows all the original members of the 506 E Company, and my dad is over here. During this time, training was rigorous and not everybody met the high standards of the Airborne Command. This is one picture of my dad when he was in training in Toccoa in Georgia, and I understand that he did machine gun and bazooka. At the end of training, the 506 did a 3-day, 115-mile forced march from Camp Toccoa, Georgia to Atlanta, Georgia. George walked 35 miles in a single day, carrying a 36-pound machine gun in addition to his regular gear. The Atlanta Journal newspaper labeled him George, Private Superman. This was the march to Toccoa, the 115-mile march. And this was the picture in the paper of my dad carrying the machine gun. After they finished that training, he was stationed in Camp McCall. This was a picture he sent home. The 82nd Airborne was preparing to go to North Africa, and George was then sent to North Africa as an EGB 447, which is an unassigned group. While in Africa, a large demonstration parachute drop took place. George and many of the troopers were injured at this time. George was then assigned to D Company 505, 82nd Airborne. In late June 1943, the 505 moved to Kairouan, Tunisia, to be near their airfield, the first large night combat jump into Sicily on July 9, 1943. The 505 was in combat for 30 days and then back to North Africa. George made his second combat jump on September 14, 1943, touching down east of Paestum, Italy. The 505 fought in Italy until Naples was taken. Then, after a brief rest and a refit in the city, boarded ships bound for Northern Ireland. Billeted at Cookstown, Ireland, to begin training for the D-Day invasion. They stayed in Cookstown about 3 months, but it was cold, wet, and dark, so they loaded up and sailed to England, landing at the Firth of Forth and then on to the Quorn, located in the Midlands, where they trained for the next 3 months, preparing for June 6, 1944, D-Day. This small fellow on this side, his name is George Fodovich, and he's still alive. He turned 100 in July, lives in Florida, and I've gone down to visit him, and my dad and him were a team together. On June 6th at 1:30 a.m., George made his third combat jump into Saint-Mihiel-Glace, France. Here he fought his way through France for 27 days. Then just a few days before the division was scheduled to be pulled off the line, the unit was ordered to seize Hill 131, a key German strongpoint and an observation post. During the attack, PFC George J. Rajner was hit by a 20-millimeter round. He survived long enough to reach an aid station, but the wound was fatal. July 3, 1944. The 505 was relieved and returned to England on July the 11th, 1944. Back in America, in early August, our mother received a telegram saying he was missing in action, and then another telegram saying he was killed in action. Our mother had a funeral mass at our church at this time. I was 8, my sister 7, my brothers 5 and 4. Our mom was 26 years old, and my dad was 27. This is a picture of what my brothers and sisters and my mom, what we all looked like when my dad died. The youngest brother here on the end, that's George Jr. It was his 4th birthday when my father was buried on the 5th of July. Our dad was first buried in a temporary military cemetery outside of Saint-Mihiel-Glace called Blowsville. His brother Joe, who was stationed in England, was able to come to France and take pictures at the cemetery in 1944. This is Blowsville Cemetery in France. This is my dad's marker. This cemetery is just an open field today. There is a big marker outside that lists all of the different units that have people buried there. In 1947, our mom received notice that all dead would be brought home or interned in a military cemetery in Europe. His brothers and our mom decided he should remain with his comrades in France. He is now buried at the American Normandy Cemetery in Saint-Laurent, France, Plot A, row 11, grave 18. And this is a picture of the Normandy American Cemetery where my father is currently interred. This was taken in 1992. We took my mother over for the first time and the only time she was there. I have gone over about 8 times, and we're planning to go again this coming May for the 80th. And then this is a picture of all of us in 1948. That was when my dad was interred in the Normandy American. And at that time, I'm 12, my sister's 11, this brother is 9, and he's 7. So that's our whole family. And today, oh my goodness, there's so many of us. My father had the brothers, and they had many children. And we've all kept in touch over the years. Okay, this is a picture of my father's brothers, and they were all serving in World War II. The oldest brother, Frank, was in the Seabees, and he was stationed in the Pacific. The next brother on the other corner is Joe, and he was 29 years old, and he enlisted, and because he had a pilot's license, he became a lieutenant, even though he never had a high school education. But he was a glider pilot instructor, and he's the gentleman that went over to France when my father was first buried, that he had an opportunity to take pictures. Down in the lower right corner is his other brother, Albert, and he was a paratrooper, and after my father was killed, the boys decided that he should not be in such a dangerous outfit, so they requested that he be switched. Well, he was put in the combat engineers, and as I understand it, that wasn't much better. And the fourth boy on the corner, he was in the Merchant Marine, and he was only 17 when he joined. He went on to become the youngest captain of a ship on the Great Lakes. And then this picture is a story. I acquired it 65 years after his death. I received a phone call from a girl that I had met through an AWON, which is American World War II War Orphans Network. And she worked at the library at Harvard University, and she knew a girl who lived in Wisconsin, and her father was Burr Smith, and he was in the Band of Brothers and did return home. And because his father worked for Kodak, he had a camera and he took many pictures. And after his death, many years later, she found a lot of negatives, undeveloped, black and white, took them to get them developed, and all the fellows said, "Oh yeah, we know who that is, that's George." And they called me, and they were having a reunion in San Antonio, so I went, got the original, made the picture, and I had a picture of two other young men that had died in the Battle of the Bulge, and was able to share it with this girl that was in Harvard. It turned out to be, one of the guys turned out to be her uncle, and this other fellow, Rudy Tate, he lived in Indiana. It was his uncle. So they were able to get a picture. Our father, PFC George J. Rajner, D Company, 505, 82nd Airborne, 3 combat jumps, awarded the following: Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Good Conduct Medal, European, African, Middle East Campaign Medal, World War II Victory Medal, Parachute Wings, Combat Infantry Badge, Honorable Service Lapel Button. Now our lives changed. Our mom is my hero. She raised all 4 of us without any public assistance and made many sacrifices for us. We subsisted on the government pension. DIC, $75 per month, $11 per child Social Security, $44 per month, and a $50 per month insurance. That lasted for 20 years. But most of all, we missed not having a dad. When other girls had dads to take them to dances and walk them down the aisle, or just be there. Those are the times when you feel the loss, and I'm sure my brothers also felt the same loss, only in a different way. Today I'm 87 years old and still have a sense of loss, even though 79 years have passed. So we honor his memory and sacrifice of all the young men who gave so much for all of us, lest we forget. I'd be happy to entertain any questions from anyone at this time. Thank you.
How are you this morning?
I'm very good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, very interesting.
I did some research about your father's units, and 3 combat jumps. That's an extraordinary achievement.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about why you are still so keen to educate others and to let others know about your father? I mean, you're 87. Why are you so driven to making sure that people remember people like your father?
Well, I always had an interest in World War II because I grew up during that time, and it was very prominent always in our mind. We were collecting grease and, metal and foil and all those different string and everything, and taking it to certain areas where you could turn it in. and newspapers at school, and it was everybody was very patriotic. And also on the little block that we lived in, the neighbor boy, his name was Baird Brooks, he passed away, and a month later my dad passed away. And 3 doors over to the left of us, her son died, but it was in an accident in the US, but it was still considered a military death. And then across the street, which the house that I eventually bought in 1958, their son also was killed. He was a Navy pilot. So we had 4 servicemen in this little short block. So everything was, World War II was a significant emotional experience for kids of my age. And after, I raised a family and everything. And when I retired, I got very interested in my dad's military service. So I joined AWON, which is the American World War II War Orphans Network, and went to a conference in San Antonio. And there was the speaker from the National Personnel Department. And I had an opportunity to talk to him. And he said to me, the only medal we ever had from my dad was the Purple Heart. And I was asking him information, and he said, if you write to me personally, he told me how to go about it. I did. He made it possible, and I received all my dad's medals, which none of us ever knew that he was entitled to, because we had no concept of how to research military items. There was not personal computers and this type of thing available. So after going to the AWON conferences, I got a lot of information. Well, then my mother and my brother also served in the Airborne and joined the local Toledo chapter, and my mother was made an honorary member. And because my mother never could drive, I always took her. Well, over there, I found out there was a newspaper they produced called the Static Line. It was printed in Atlanta, Georgia. So I asked this one guy, I said, could I get a copy? So he gave me his. Well, in it, you could subscribe. So I went ahead and subscribed to it. And from that point on, I knew all about the reunions that the 82nd, the different units were having. So I found out they were having one in Fort Bragg. And I called this gentleman who was in charge, who lived in Florida. And he said, oh, yeah, you're more than welcome. Come on down. So I asked my brother, who had served in the 82nd, and he said, oh, I'd love to go back to Fort Bragg because he trained there. So we got in the car and drove down, and we attended our first reunion. Well, we happened to meet 2 or 3 different gentlemen there that knew my dad, which was something that we didn't expect. And then we got acquainted with everybody else. And from that point on, I went every year to the reunion, and I've done it up until the time when they didn't really disband, but they had to stop because everybody just got too old or passed away and they couldn't come anymore. So they did form a group in 2004 called Family and Friends of the 505, and even that is not very active anymore. So then I went to the 508 because they had invited us, and the 507, they had disbanded. But the 508 is still active to a point, not as big as it used to be, but that I was able to get a lot of information. And in 2004, the Static Line had a 2-week tour of Europe, all the places that the 82nd had served in. And I joined it and went on that. And there was 357 veterans and families, 7 buses. And we toured every major military cemetery and combat zone that they participated in, from Belgium to Holland to France, to a little bit into Germany. And then we went back to England, to Corn, where they were billeted. And it's still an open field, believe it or not, after all these years. And we had a service there it's a little small village in the square. And a lady came up to one of the guys and was asking about somebody else. And they said, no, they didn't know who it was, but people were still searching, after all these years for contacts. So based on that, I wrote to I went to the National Archives in Washington. I made two trips there and went out to where the archives are, and researched. I went to Carlisle in Pennsylvania to the Army installation there, and we had an opportunity to go through the records there, and I searched different things, but I'm still looking for 2 items. I wrote to it's in Virginia, for his morning report. I wanted the first 6 days of July of 1944, and the lady sent me a letter and said she wanted to send me the whole Normandy campaign, and I had to pay her $300. And I said, no. So I never got those. And then there's every jump class, when they go through Fort Benning, when they get their wings, there's a picture, and we've never had a picture. And I went to Fort Benning, but they couldn't help me either. So those are the 2 items I'm still searching for.
Thank you. Have a fair few questions. This is from Wesley. Have your siblings taken as much interest in your father's service as you have?
Well, the first year, let's see, I was 65 when I started. So it's been about 22 years now. I asked them, my mother had a few items that my father had sent home over when he was in service. Well, unfortunately, I didn't get very many of the items. She divided them amongst the other 3 because I was already had married and left, her home. So I asked him to give it to me, and I put it all together, and I made him a book for Christmas of everything that I had found, researched, took pictures, copies, everything. And everybody's got, and then I kept updating this book all these years. So they share the same thing. And like I say, the brother closest in age to me, he's 3 years younger. He served in the 82nd, and he was in the 319 in the artillery. And then my youngest brother, George, he served in the Marine Corps for 6 years. But yes, they're military, and they all have an interest in it. And my brother did go with me to Fort Bragg because he was down there. And of course, he could take me around different places. He said, oh, I was here, I was there. But it's changed considerably now because they've built all new buildings and everything over the years. But it was always interesting to go to a military installation.
We now have a really great question from Elaine, and it's one that I think everybody that watched your great presentation may be asking themselves too, or have asked themselves. When you look at that photograph of your mum with you and your siblings, it's a beautiful photograph. But the question is, what did your mother do to survive with 4 children to take care of? And that comes from Elaine.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, we didn't have a house because she rented. Well, there was a house 3 doors down, and the older lady, she passed away. Her grandson, who had just got out of the Army, inherited it, sold it to my mom. My mom had $600 to her name when my dad died. And unfortunately, at that time, women couldn't get a loan, and they didn't count the government money. That was not income. Okay. So my mother's sister's husband bought the house, and then my mother paid him. That's how we acquired a home. And of course, the house needed repairs. So the man next door, who lost his son, he replastered the kitchen walls and helped her, get the house. It was a good sized house. It was 4 bedrooms, and it was a 10-room house, but it needed quite a few repairs. Well, over the years, my mother did little by little, and finally, she had the place in, really good shape. But my mother didn't work until I was 14. Then she got a job with the school board, and she was what they call a matron, or a cleaning lady. And she did that for 30 years. But that was not what you call a high-paying job. And also with the military pay, if you were only, my dad was a PFC, so my mother was at the low end of the food chain. So if you had higher rank, you got more money. So then over the years, the Gold Star wives, they lobbied in Washington for many years, and it took them almost 10 years to get the GI benefits for the women. And by this time, when they would have helped the child, attend college, I had already graduated from high school and was married, so I wasn't eligible anymore. But I know many people that are in the A1 group with me, they went to college on the GI Bill, but it had a lot of restrictions in it, things that you had to follow. The government has a lot of rules. But anyway, so my mother did that, and I worked. When the time I was 15, I had a job with the credit bureau, and I worked there till I graduated, and then I got married a year after I graduated from high school, and we just, lived normally. My mother never had a car, so we didn't have that expense. We rode the bus everywhere. That's how I went to high school. I went to a private Catholic school, and we all went to Catholic grade school, but at that time there was no tuition. As long as you belonged to the parish and you contributed, whatever you could, they never questioned it. And high school was, my tuition at that time was $100. And I think today it's probably like $10,000 to the same school, which I go back to for reunions. It's hard to believe that it would change that much, but, things have changed. And my sister and I both attended, and they gave us a $20 a year discount. And we used to go to the office every month and pay $10 on our tuition. And that's what we did.
We've got some more questions here, but I wanted to ask you, do you think too many people take things for granted in this country today, given what you went through as a child, what your dad gave in World War II? Do you think people don't realize just exactly how much they have and how lucky they are?
Oh, you're absolutely right. These kids today have, well, their expectations are just, so high. We didn't expect things. We were just happy with, whatever we got. Just like at Christmas, how many gifts would you get? You got a stocking and some candy and an orange, and you got one or two gifts, and that was it. But it was, everybody was like that. Like my brother says, we were poor, but we didn't know
it. So a comment from Pat, and she echoes everybody else by saying thank you, terrific talk, and then she adds, what a challenge that you faced through your life, and also in terms of piecing together what your dad did. And then we have a comment from Lois, and she says, I have not had the opportunity to visit the beaches of Normandy. What were your first impressions? What did you go on to study about World War II that you did not know growing up at that time? And she adds that my mother and I chat about what I am learning and what you knew at the time. So what were your first impressions of Normandy? That's a good question.
Right. The first thing we did when we went to the cemetery, and we had my mother. It was in 1992, and my daughter had just graduated from law school, so she was there with a friend. So the four of us were there, and it was very, very emotional. And when you go there to the cemetery, because my mother was the widow, they personally escort you in a golf cart, the whole family, out to the cemetery. And they have a book inside that you can write in. And it was really, really, really emotional at that time. I'll never forget it. But anyway, we did that. And then we toured all of the battlefield. Well, it was the way the cemetery is laid out. There's a chapel, and then there's a big table. It's got the whole Normandy landings, it's all in colors and red and inside the walls and everything. And behind all of that, a lot of people don't know it, there's the wall of the missing. And I never realized there were that many servicemen from all the different services that are listed there. It's just unbelievable how many. There's almost 10,000 buried, but there's got to be at least 2,000 names on the wall of the missing. And then after leaving the cemetery, we went right on the beach, and there's still the I can't think what do you call it, Sue?
Mulberries?
No, the where they had the guns and everything, the Germans.
The long guns.
No. What do they call those?
Atlantic
We
Strong
toured. No,
German,
no. The
German strong points, the strong points.
right. So we
Fences.
went inside of those, and then we walked the beach. It's absolutely beautiful. I mean, when you look back on the pictures of World War II, and you see all of the equipment and the horrible scenes and everything, and then you see it today, it still is a place where people vacation. You know, there were houses there and everything, and we started years ago. My brother went on a trip, and we started in Westerham, which is the beginning of the Normandy beach, all the way down to Point de Hope, which is 55 miles. And we stopped at every point and visited the Long Guns and Outer Manche, Utah Beach, Point de Hope, all of those places. And every one of them is significant, and you hear the stories, and they all have a museum. And because I was on that trip with the 82nd, we stopped at all these points. And this was so emotional and so inspiring and educational that these veterans would tell you all these stories of all the things that happened at these, where they were and what they've seen. And we'd walk up to a field, and they would say, oh, well, this so-and-so was over here and this was over there. And they would just recall all of this and talk to everybody, which they were actually talking amongst themselves, but we were listening, which is what's, and then I've met different people over there. This one lady, she comes regularly with her school children. And she said they start in 3rd grade, this is in France, and they bring them there. And she particularly honors my father. I have sent her pictures, and we have met over there a few times. And she also works with the British people too, because there were a lot of British and Canadians, that served. But the people in England too, they bring their children over to the beaches every year because they want people to remember and to never forget what had taken place there in all these years ago. And I have friends in St. Mary Glace and in different places that we keep in touch with. And we'll be going again in May, and hopefully, we'll reconnect again. And there is a society there called the Flowers of Memory, and they have adopted the graves. My father's grave was adopted. And it's just, really impressive at any of the military cemeteries in Europe that you attend.
When are you going in May? What dates are you going in May?
We're going to leave around the 31st of May, and we're staying in Chef Dupont for about 8 days.
We'll miss you by about 2 weeks because the friends are taking a group to Normandy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When are you going?
London, and then we'll cross the Channel. We'll spend a couple of days in Normandy, and then we end in Paris.
Okay.
So I have a question here, or other statements from Elaine. How proud your father would be to know that he has never, in caps, been forgotten.
Absolutely. And his brother's the same way. His last brother passed away about 3 years ago, and we've kept in touch over the years. And his kids, we still see each other, cousins and everything. But oh yeah, you had to know my dad. My mother always said he was an adventurer. That's why I joined the paratroopers. I always said, no sane man wants to jump out of a perfectly good airplane, but I had an opportunity when we went to Dallas. We had a reunion there, the 505, and they took us out to the airfield, and I got to ride in a DC, well, the same plane that the paratroopers were in, and it was one that actually flew on D-Day. So I got to experience what it was like to ride in one, no acoustics or anything, just loud engines.
Wow, that's incredible. What was that like? Tell us more about that, because could you for the first time start to appreciate the experience that your father had?
Oh, absolutely. We were like almost sitting on the floor of the airplane. These guys were really great down there, and the veterans got to ride in a P-51.
Right. Wow.
That was funny watching them big tall guy slide in behind the pilot because
Yeah.
a P-51 is not very big inside.
No, it's not, but it's a fantastically powerful plane. I
Oh,
mean,
it was, and all the vets got to do that were at the reunion. It was unbelievable. Yeah.
So I just wanted to carry on with Elaine's statement. She says that it's obvious your father. Oops, hang on a second. It's obvious your father has been very much appreciated by you, and you've brought his life story to many others. Are you proud of what you've been able to do in terms of making sure he's not forgotten?
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not what you'd call a prolific writer. And I know a lot of people that are in the same group that I am in. They've all wrote books about their dad. And I wish I could do that, but I don't have those skills,
So you actually can remember World War II. You're
Oh,
old
yeah.
enough
Oh,
to
absolutely.
remember. What was it? What are your most vivid memories of being a child during World War II?
Oh, I'll tell you, one Sunday we had a bombing run in Toledo. That was what they call a mock run, so that all the civil defense people could participate. And we were in a movie theater, my brothers and sisters and I. We were in the local movie theater, and they made everybody stay inside. It was in the Sunday afternoon. So we got out around 4 or 5 o'clock, and we were walking home about 3 blocks away, and we cut through a neighbor's yard. And when I cut through the yard, I went between two garages, and I found a bomb. It was cardboard, So I have a newspaper article on it and everything. So I took it home, and my mother right away, she said, well, I have to call the local civil defense person. Every neighborhood had one. And on the corner was ours, and his name was Mr. Pupp, P-A-P-P. And she called him, and he came down. And I was about almost 8 years old. And I didn't want to give it up. I wanted to keep it. And they had an awful hard time talking me out of this thing. So finally, I give it up to them because we only lived about a block away from the river. And the Maumee River empties into the Lake Erie, into the bay. Well, farther down from us, maybe about a mile and a half, is all kind of, it was a shipbuilding, ironworks, a unit cast, all kind of, the main electric plant was not too far away. So those would have all been targets, So that's what they wanted to know. Where did the bombs drop at within the city? And I found one.
Wow, that's
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, it was. And then there was a movie that came out years later with Margaret O'Brien. And she was in London, and she had found something, and she didn't want to give it up. And I said to my mom years later, I said, no, I know. I wanted to do the same thing. But in 1949, I believe, no, yeah, in 49, because I was in the 8th grade, they built a memorial on the civic, in Toledo, the courthouse is there. So they have a plaza in the center. So they built a war memorial. So they asked my mom if I would, and then there's 3 or 4 other women that were in the Gold Star Wives, their children. So we were war orphans. So we unveiled that memorial in Toledo then in 1949.
so. Correct me. The first time that you saw your father's grave was when you were with your mother. Is that right?
In 92.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? I don't want to. If it's too difficult, we can move on.
No,
But
it's okay. My husband had passed away in 91, and I always wanted to go to Europe to visit my father's grave. And after my husband passed away, the first thing I did, I went and I got a passport. And I told my mother, you need to get a passport because we're going to go. So she did. And in the meantime, my daughter was finishing law school, and it was Valentine's Day. We were out to dinner, and we got to talking. And she said, yeah, she'd like to go too. So we decided we'd all go. So we rented a car. We flew into Germany, into Frankfurt, and we drove then to a few other places we stopped along the way. And then we finally made it to Normandy. And like I said, it was very emotional for my mom too, and everybody. But it was like finally, it wasn't closure, but it was I don't know how, exactly what word to say for it, but it was just a very emotional experience. But I've done it now, you know. And then as years went by, my sister, she managed to go with her husband one year. Then I went with my brother and his wife, and then my other brother and I, we went together. So, and then I went again with my daughter a couple of times, and we're going to go again.
What is it that takes you back there? I mean, 8 times, that's a lot. I mean, what is it
Well,
about? What is it about returning that you find so
right.
profound?
Well, I visit my mother and my husband and my other relatives here in the cemetery. So why would I not visit my father? You know,
It's just 4,000 miles away.
doesn't matter. And anyway, I like Paris.
Well, there you go.
I went to spend a week there by myself before my brother arrived.
Good
And
for you.
I was about 78 at the time. So you can do it. I just followed Rick Steves and I stayed where he recommended and it worked out perfect. I could walk to the Eiffel Tower and everywhere.
Um,
I'm adventurous like my father.
yeah, I'm amazed that you haven't jumped out of a C-47
No,
yet.
no. I draw the line on that.
You're going to do that.
My brother is a skin diver and he teaches it for 50 years.
Oh,
He's
wow.
the other paratrooper. He isn't happy just up above. He's got to go down below.
So on your 100th birthday, we expect to see you in a parachute, okay?
No, not this one. That's out of the question. Absolutely. I don't like heights, number one.
So we have John making a statement here. God bless you. So sorry for your loss. Your father was a true American hero who made the ultimate sacrifice. Thank you for his service. Thank you for sharing. Lois adds, wow, how wonderful. Thank you for the memory. Jim says, thank you. What a great story. This sounds like an outstanding post-retirement hobby. I wouldn't quite say hobby, but passion and calling might be more accurate.
Exactly.
Roberta says, Carol, I had the honor of meeting you at the White House breakfast for Gold Star families. Your presentation was wonderful, and you continue to.
I know Roberta from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm working with AWON also. Thank you for sharing your story. I relate to your story. And then one final comment. From Elaine, I went to the cemetery in Normandy with my now deceased husband, a World War II veteran, some years ago on a tour where we had a small private ceremony and we placed single flowers on a grave of our choice. I saw my normally stoic husband well up with tremendous emotion as he saluted his fallen brethren. The cemetery there is the most beautiful place maintained by the USA. Do you think that your father's sacrifice is ironically better appreciated in Europe than it perhaps is back in the United States, given your visits over there?
Well, I think they take the time to educate the children, and they have all the battle sites that they can take them to. Thank God. My father wrote a letter to me, and in it he said, I'm so happy that I don't have to see you children standing on the corner begging for food. And that this was when he had been in Italy, and he wrote me 4 letters, and he was so happy that I was able to write to him. And my sister finally was able to learn to print, and she had sent him 1 letter. So yes, and then he got interviewed by the local newspaper when he was in London. And that was one of the things that he said, that he was so glad that he was able to do what he could do to make things better for all of the children in the United States.
How many orphans were there in the United States?
Around 800,000.
See, when you hear that statistic, it makes you think, well, this is a great untold story of World War II.
It is.
We always focus on those who gave their lives and those who fought, but that's almost 1 million young Americans that had their father taken away from them. It's
Well, just think of it. There was four of us, and I know other people. There were three, two, but there was a lot of them. There's only one, because the average age was 19 to 25 of World War II.
What were the things about your father that you enjoyed most discovering? What made you smile? What made you happy?
Well, my father used to do a little bit of boxing when he was like 20, 21 years old. And then when he was in North Africa, he did a little bit of boxing. And we came across a little newspaper they put out called The Duster. And he defeated a local person there. So, he liked to go swimming in the river against the current to keep in shape. He did a very daring thing when he was married to my mother when he was 21 years old, jumped off a boat, excursion boat. In the evening, it was like they used to call them a moonlight cruise. Excuse me. And on a $5 bet, he jumped off of it, swam to the shore, and watched him drag for him. So then the next day he felt guilty and went to the bridge tender because it was a swing bridge and said, "I'm sorry, I held up everything. It was me." But they didn't do anything. So then another year later, he did it again. That time he got arrested. And my mother took me downtown to the jail. And when they opened the little wooden window, all I could see was this man's face, and it was like a beard and that, and scared me. And I started crying. I was about 6. This was just before he went in service. And my mother bailed him out, of course, but it made the papers. So I, through my research, I had to go to the library. I sat in that library for hours going through microfiche, and you know what that's all about.
Yeah.
I found no, when it happened, nobody could tell me. So I just had to say, well, if he was on a boat, it had to be summertime. So I started in June, and I found it happened over like the holiday, so around the 4th or 5th of July.
Do you feel better knowing that you actually did have a relationship with your father, that you have memories of your father?
Yes. That's one thing my brothers and sisters don't have. I know what his voice sounded like. I've been visiting with him to his mother. He had a car. I was riding in it. We used to walk across the bridge to go downtown. And I can remember all those things, He dropped my sister on me one time, playing, knocked the wind out of me.
What characteristics do you think that you have that you've inherited from your father?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm tall. Put it that way. I'm adventurous too, to a point. I'm not quite as adventurous as he was, but yeah, I'm pretty independent.
So, although you lost your father, and you can never make up for that absence in your life, do you feel that in some ways, because of your connection to other orphans and your travels and research, do you feel like you've gained friends and relationships
Absolutely.
that have been very rich in your life?
Oh yeah. Prior to joining A1, I only knew 2 other people that had lost their dad in World War II. But since joining A1, I've made quite a few friends, and we keep in touch. Marilyn lives in Seattle, and we went to the White House together, and Roberta joined us there. And Marilyn and I also was presenters of a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier one year. We did that for A1. We've gone to almost every conference that they have. They only meet every 2 years. And it's been a wonderful experience to listen to all of their stories. And some of them are really sad that the parents never kept in touch with the other half of the family, like they never knew the father's family. I met a gentleman who was in the Navy. He was 62 years old. He never knew his father died in World War II. Because some of these people just never shared any of that information with their children. Or the mother remarried and she changed the child's name. And kids never knew.
Can you tell us a little bit about the 3 jumps that your father made? Just take us through those 3 jumps, because
Well, you know, but there's a book that was written about the Sicily jump, and I really think it's important because that was the very first night combat jump that anybody had ever done before. I mean, this was a whole regiment that jumped. You know, that was, and people all talk about D-Day, but they forget about the ones that, you know, took place prior to that. And his name was Ruggiero. He wrote the book. I think it was called First In. And I bought, I think, every book on the 82nd already and read all of them. And I also bought the book that Richard, you know, Major Winters wrote about his life. And I was so surprised when I read the book that he mentioned my father, that he would remember him.
Wow. Did you ever meet Dick Winters?
No, I kicked myself that I never took it upon myself. I could have drove to Pennsylvania. I live in Ohio, you know, how far is that, you know, that I didn't do that. I should have done it.
Because your father is one of the original Band of Brothers.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. I met Carwood Lipton, though, because his son lived in Toledo, and Carwood used to work in Toledo. And there was an article in the paper that he was visiting, and I called, and him and I got together at his son's house, and we shared some information back and forth, and he shared some things with me, too.
So I have one more statement here from Andrew, and he says it's a very interesting fact to share with students, just the sheer number of children who lost a parent during World War II. Can I ask you, do you go into high schools? Have you talked about your
Yes.
father in front of
I did a presentation. Our local high school, since 1918, has done a Memorial Day service. And the teacher there, Mr. Boyle, he teaches World War II history. So he's keeping the World War II alive with the high school kids. And he is in charge of the memorial for the last, I'm going to say, about 6 or 7 years. And they have a lovely garden area, and every student that has passed away in service is listed from World War I all the way through to current. And I did a presentation for him on that, and went to his class once. And he's gone to, there's a program through the teachers that he attended that he was able to go to Normandy and that. And he has an uncle, I think, that's buried in Normandy. And that was sparked his interest in it.
Well, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time. I just wanted to say on behalf of Friends, thank you for your time. What a fantastic presentation, wonderful conversation, and you've done amazing things by keeping your father's memory alive.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us today.